Clinicians and educators working with preschool children recognize the dizzying rates with which they grow and change. Not only do individual children develop rapidly, they also change and develop different skills at different rates. As a result, making judgments about developmental delays or disabilities in young children is a complex process. The process becomes even more complex when trying to assess suspected disabilities in young children from diverse cultures and language groups. The intertwining of language and other cultural factors with growth and development presents challenges to even the most skilled clinicians. As discussed in the following program, sensitivity to cultural and linguistic norms and open communication with the family and other caregivers in the child's environment are important considerations during the assessment process.
Okay, stay right there. Keep it right there. I got something. You got something already? Another big fish. Oh my God. Reel it in.
Working with preschool children in general, the way I describe it to my students is that it's like working with people from another planet. It's only been in the last 10 to 15 years that psychologists, educators have really concentrated on working with young children. And we really don't know a lot about young children.
That looks like you.
He looks like me? Yeah, that's my baby.
Where's your daughter?
No daughter.
You have a daughter?
A lot of fun to work with, but because they're changing rapidly and they're so variable, not only across children, but within themselves, their skills develop at different rates. Sometimes there are gender differences, and then certainly if you have culturally and linguistically diverse preschoolers, it's a very complex process to work with young children.
Hi, Matilda. Or my sister or what? Cousin.
My name is Dr. Colleen Clay. I'm an educational consultant with the Caribbean Research Center here at Medgavr's College. By training, I'm a school psychologist. For many years in forums, we have had school personnel asking, why do we get this mass of children coming from the English-speaking Caribbean being placed in special ed classes? That became a major concern for us, and we started looking in the situation and realized that there was a need to provide some information for the professionals out there. We cannot at any point in the assessment process forget the role of the parent. When one is assessing a child from the English-speaking Caribbean, especially a child who has had an experience with migration, one needs to take into account the caregiving history, both from back home when the child might have been left, and on joining the parent here in the United States. Did the child come with a grandmother, for example? Because research has shown that when the child is with a grandparent, that the adjustment tends to be easier, because we need to know what is the nature of the child's experience with that caregiver. Also, children are often adopted, and all those things become important in a session with the parent or the substitute parent.
A child is not growing up in a vacuum. A child is not only growing up in the home or in the school, but they're exposed to extended family members, to neighbors, perhaps to church organizations, and the contextual framework, we're trying to get the larger picture, the more ecological focus on the child, really provides a great amount of information and data for people to make decisions.
When we talk about the English-speaking Caribbean, we're not talking about a monolithic culture. We're talking about a culture in which there are various language groups. Very often those languages might be Creole forms, but nevertheless we need to acknowledge that this is a language, this is an authentic language of the individual child and his or her parent. Very often, though, if you ask a parent from one of the English-speaking countries like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, St. Lucia, and all of those nations, if you ask them what language they speak, they'll say that they speak English. And that's often what you hear. But in an ongoing dialogue, you might realize that they are speaking something else.
We're going to mail our letters. We're going to go to the mailbox. We're going to go across the street and
put our mail in the mailbox, and then we're going to cross back over.
There are quite a number of issues with respect to speech and language. Bearing in mind that language is at the heart of assessment. We might even say assessment is language because the two are so intertwined. It's done through language. So we're talking about a language-based experience in a very thorough way. It's very important that the assessor be aware of his or her own limitations, lack of knowledge about the child's language, or his or her own bias towards the language that the child might be speaking.
The multidisciplinary team approach has a lot going for it. It's a very inclusive way of working with a child, and you really have the expertise of a variety of people in different developmental domains. And I think it's critical because no one professional is an expert in everything, in language, in fine motor, in gross motor, in social emotional functioning. When you're working with many professionals discussing one child, then is the time when we have the most accurate picture of a child and we can make the best decisions. You can guard against some of the biases and just human elements that may cloud the picture. Remaining objective is a difficult task. I don't believe that there is non-biased assessment. I think that there's limited biased assessment. And to the extent that we can limit biases and external factors, we're going to do a better job for the child. A key strategy for professionals working with young children is to be aware of themselves, their own values, to be aware of possible differences of opinion. Key element would be to consult with other professionals. Just working with people who are culturally and linguistically diverse, because that's how you get to know the language that they speak and how they interact. You get a sense of cultural norms. This is how they raise their children, this is how they speak to their children. And we really need to work with that, not change it. There's absolutely no rush to start doing formal testing. Just observe the child to see how the child functions in different settings. And you want to see the child interacting with his or her peers to see what kinds of social skills they have and where they are developmentally. I think that formal testing is a necessary component, but it's only one piece of the pie.
When we look at children based on that ecological model, we are not only looking at the child, but we're looking at the child's experience, the opportunities to learn, the nature of the discourse, the nature of the interaction with the adult. We need not only to pay attention to the usual domains that are assessed, which is the analytical and the numerical, but to recognize that children do bring other capabilities to the assessment experience or to the classroom experience. And that is Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. Some children can be very physical, kinesthetics, can be very much advanced. If you find a child coming from a rural area, that child might be extremely competent in how they deal with space, how they approach using the physical self as part of how they engage the world. Children might be very experienced with music and can demonstrate high competences in language and numbers and so on if music becomes a conduit through which things get expressed. Can we use music? Can we use a child's musical knowledge and love and experience as a way of developing those analytic and numerical skills that we want to develop? We know, for example, that Caribbean children are very adept at interpersonal engagements. Is that a skill? Is that a competency that's worth noting in the assessment process? I can't emphasize enough how intimidating a process it is for the majority of our people because they feel that they don't know what questions to ask. It therefore means that the people who are responsible for doing assessment as evaluators, psychologists, teachers, that they need to respect, there has to be a basic regard and respect for the parents.
Parent training and family consultation, certainly that's shown to be an effective intervention in and of itself, is working with the parents to help their kids, actually helping the parents to become interventionists for their own children. We need to make very concerted efforts to make them feel comfortable. We want to do what's best for their children, and we can only do that if we have their help and their cooperation.
We're talking about something that's moved way beyond the informed consent. We're talking about an approach that's based on a principle of regard and respect for the culture of the parents, for their roles, because as I said, they're going to have to follow through.
Isn't that amazing? That's science, wow. You're gonna be a scientist when you grow up, when you get older? You can teach Daddy a lot of things about science.
Why not engage that parent and involve that parent from the very beginning in all aspects of the assessment process and give integrity to the home, the child's home?
Okay then, so let's go. You ready? All right.
By providing an important link between the home and the school, skilled bilingual clinicians and educators are making a difference. They ensure that all children with disabilities receive the services they need.